Before you take that next sip of coffee, there is something you need to know. In fact, coffee may be the very thing holding you back from achieving your carnivore results. Coffee can cause 3 main issues that may be affecting you without you even realizing it. So in this video, I'll break it all down. And later in the video, I'll reveal the 2 types of people who definitely need to avoid coffee in order to maximize their results on carnivore. Now on the surface, it seems strange how just a small amount of one bean can have such a massive impact on so many people. So how does coffee actually affect you? Well, here's the problem. Coffee is a bean, which is obviously part of a plant. Unlike animals, plants can't defend themselves through physical capability, such as biting, kicking, or running. Instead, each plant has its own unique set of defense compounds, which it uses to deter anyone or anything from consuming them. Coffee beans, unfortunately, are no exception to this. In coffee, one of their defense compounds is caffeine. This to many feels like a miracle compound. You drink a cup of coffee in the morning and it feels like you have a lot more energy. But unfortunately, there's no such thing as a free lunch. Caffeine is a plant's defense mechanism intended to fry the brains of small insects that try to eat it. All this time, I thought it was made to give me extra energy in the mornings, but apparently not. Not very considerate of it. Fortunately though, because we're a lot larger than insects, it doesn't fry our brains and kill us, but it does do something else. Adrenaline and cortisol are both hormones that trigger the body's fight or flight response, increasing our heart rate and short-term energy levels due to a perceived sense of danger. Caffeine increases both of these hormones by around 30%. This right here is a key reason why many people get super anxious after drinking a cup of coffee. Now there are some incredibly strange individuals out there who actually like the taste of black coffee, but to us regular people, it tastes incredibly bitter. The reason for this is it's our taste buds identifying these toxic compounds and trying to deter us from consuming it. Caffeine is certainly not the only problematic compound in coffee, however. Tannins are a compound that binds to both protein and minerals. They are what is known as an anti-nutrient. Anti-nutrient compounds are the reason that we cannot absorb a large proportion of the nutrients found in plants. An interesting example of this is that there are countless studies showing that even despite the fact that spinach is in theory very high in iron, we humans are only able to absorb between 2 and 10% of it. Because tannins bind to minerals, they seriously impact our nutrient absorption. But the real problem with tannins lies in their binding to protein. Our cells have proteins on the outside of them, so we consume these tannins and they actually bind to our cells, which causes inflammation. These are just 2 of the many defense compounds found in coffee. But now let's look at the problems these defense compounds may be causing you. For many people, the very first thing they do in the morning is grab a cup of coffee. Now immediately after you consume this coffee, you feel incredible, you have a lot of energy, but then what happens is come mid-afternoon, you're all of a sudden met with this massive energy crash. The reason this happens is due to how caffeine fundamentally works. Caffeine blocks what is known as the adenosine receptors in the brain. This is because both caffeine and adenosine have very similar structures. Adenosine's role is to say to you, look, you've had a big day, you've worked hard, but now it's time to rest. So it makes you tired. So when you consume coffee and therefore caffeine, these adenosine receptors are blocked from receiving adenosine and you no longer feel tired. But as the caffeine wears off, all of this adenosine floods in at once, making you feel super lethargic. You're met with this sudden wave of fatigue, you're in a bad mood, everyone seems annoying, I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. It's certainly not ideal. Now you can actually prevent this by delaying caffeine intake for 90 minutes upon waking. However, the other massive issue with caffeine is the disruptance to sleep that it causes. Caffeine significantly disrupts your sleep quality. It has what is known as a quarter life of 12 hours. What this essentially means is that 12 hours after you've consumed caffeine, 25% of it is still in your system. I personally noticed that if I consume caffeine in the afternoon, I wake up the next morning feeling nowhere near as refreshed. That right there is a key distinction. It may not affect your ability to get to sleep, but it does disrupt your overall sleep quality. Now, some people are slower and faster metabolizers of caffeine, but a good general rule is to stop consuming caffeine for at least 12 hours before you go to bed. Otherwise, you may find that you're just not as energized throughout the day as you could be. The second and perhaps most surprising issue that coffee can cause is stalled weight loss or even weight gain. But it's not for the reason you might think. It's not actually due to the defense compounds in coffee. Now, coffee itself contains no energy from a caloric point of view. However, who wants to drink black coffee? It is bitter. It tastes very average. I tried to convince myself I liked it for a very long time, but objectively it just tastes very average. So what a lot of people do is they'll add other things to their coffee. Some people add cream, some people add milk, some people add butter. Now the problem with this is that dairy is quite literally designed for the growth of a species, so it's incredibly high in energy. And remember, fat is simply stored energy. If we consume more energy than we burn, this excess energy is stored as fat. So if we are consuming a significant amount of milk, butter, cream in our coffees, it can have a serious effect on weight loss. In fact, just the other day I was talking to a mate on Carnivore, and what he said I found pretty interesting. He was actually using coffee as a way to gain weight. He was having multiple coffees per day and putting a ridiculous amount of cream in it. He was having the equivalent of 3 massive steaks per day in just cream alone. And it actually worked a little bit too well for him. He gained like 5 kilos in 3 weeks, so he's had to cut back on the cream. He wasn't trying to gain weight that fast. But that right there is a perfect illustration of someone who was putting too much cream in their coffee and therefore ended up gaining weight as a direct consequence of it. So I would be very careful with the amount of dairy you're putting in your coffee, in particular when it comes to butter and cream, because those are a lot more energy dense than milk. Another thing, although which are obviously plants, many people on Carnivore do still add to their coffee, is sweeteners. Although sweeteners do contain no energy, they can seriously mess with your hunger signaling. Some sweeteners spike your blood sugar, which causes the hormone insulin to elevate in order to bring your blood sugar back down. The problem with this is insulin actually blocks another hormone called leptin, which is what is responsible for saying to your brain, hey, we're full, we can stop eating now. Now there are also carbohydrates in milk, which do the same thing. Even sweeteners such as erythritol, which in most people don't seem to spike your blood sugar, they can still have an impact on you. The hypothesized reason for this is that because these things are sweet, when your body consumes something sweet, it expects energy, but it never receives it, which messes with your hunger signaling and causes an increase in appetite. I'm not saying you have to completely avoid these things in order to achieve all your goals on Carnivore, but if you are someone who's had stalled weight loss, or maybe you're even gaining weight, it's definitely something you want to think about. Another problem with coffee is the gut issues that it can potentially cause. Caffeine itself is actually a laxative. Because on Carnivore you don't have plant material, which actually absorbs some of the coffee you drink and helps to bulk up your stools. Even if you didn't have problems with coffee in the past, theoretically, on Carnivore, you could have problems. However, I haven't heard of too many people like this, but it is something you may want to consider if you are having prolonged problematic bathroom visits. You see, I could have said diarrhea there, but keeping it classy, you're welcome. Now, there are 2 other issues caused by coffee, and if you are someone who suffers from either of these things, you will definitely want to give coffee up. Earlier in the video, I discussed how your fight or flight hormones, such as adrenaline and cortisol, increase significantly after consuming a cup of coffee. Now, this alone, in individuals who are prone to anxiety, this can make your symptoms significantly worse. But coffee doesn't only cause temporary anxiety, it can also worsen your baseline mood levels. The defense compounds in coffee, such as tannins, which we discussed earlier, can cause significant cellular damage in your gut. Now, this is a problem as 2 of the key hormones responsible for your mood are actually synthesized there. The first is serotonin, which is the hormone responsible for giving you a calm and relaxed mood. In fact, when people are depressed and go see a psychiatrist, they are actually prescribed a drug called an SSRI, which stands for a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. This goes to show how important serotonin is. But here's the thing, 90% of serotonin is actually synthesized in your gut. So when all the cells in your gut are damaged, it becomes a lot harder to create this hormone, and therefore your overall baseline level of mood decreases. This is why we see so many people go on a carnivore diet, remove all the plant toxins, and their lifelong depression reverses. The second key hormone is dopamine. Now, 50% of this is also synthesized in our guts. This is the hormone responsible for giving you a sense of pleasure, a sense of reward. It makes us feel really good. When your gut is significantly damaged by things like coffee, you can only imagine what's going to happen to your overall baseline mood. The craziest part about what I've just said, however, is that they don't even teach this to psychology students. I remember I asked this girl one time who was studying psychology, do you know where serotonin's made? And she had no idea. This girl was in her final year of studies and they'd never taught it to her. Instead, what they're taught is just to push some pill. But I mean, obviously that makes sense. There's no money in telling people to change their diets. So what do we expect? Most people can drink coffee on Carnivore without feeling super anxious or super depressed. But for those of you who have been on carnivore for a while, you're still including coffee, and you're not just feeling as good as you know you could, I would strongly recommend at least giving coffee a break. Now, before I explain why I still drink coffee on carnivore despite all of these obvious downsides, let's look at the one final type of person who should definitely avoid it, and that is people with an autoimmune condition. The reason for this is incredibly straightforward. These things appear to be caused by inflammation, which then causes their own body to attack itself. So the inflammatory defense compounds in coffee can definitely cause some issues. So why, despite all of its very obvious problems, do I still drink coffee? Well, there's actually a very scientific reason for this. I like it. I know it's a plant, I know it's not ideal for me, but I do enjoy consuming some sort of beverage. I also drink it very socially. I frequently meet friends at cafes. Now, I could drink something like sparkling water, but to me, it's just not quite the same. There is this very slippery slope when it comes to overall enjoyment of life and trying to optimize health. The reason I do carnivore is for both. I mean, we can look at the chronic disease rates. Nearly 1 in 2 people get cancer nowadays. So I want to eat the proper human diet to do my best to avoid it. But I also do carnivore because it adds to my quality of life. I have seemingly unlimited energy, which I did not have on previous diets. But one thing for me that I don't want to do is take things all the way too far in the optimizing for health aspect of life. I mean, you can see great examples of this online. Look at that Brian Johnson guy who's taking hundreds of pills per day and starving himself. We got Paul Saladino, who's too scared to touch a receipt. Personally, for me, I just don't want to be that way. Sure, I may only live to 115 instead of 120 because technically speaking, I am poisoning myself. And when people say to me, Max, should I drink coffee? Do you think it's a good idea? I'll say to them, look, no, I don't think it's good for you. You will be better off without it. But like I said, I just enjoy it. It's not having any significant short-term effects on me. And because my diet is 100% meat and eggs, I don't think having a little amount of some bean is going to have too much of an effect on me long-term. Well, at least I hope not. However, that could just be the coffee addict in me speaking. But if you are someone who is suffering from the symptoms like I discussed in this video, you should definitely eliminate it, at least temporarily. If you are going to continue drinking coffee like me, there are some things you can do to minimize these effects. And the best part is you only need to make a few small changes. So in this video right here, I break all of this down. It's an entire video on how to minimize the effects of coffee. See you next time.